where to even freaking begin. So as many of you guys know, I had my baby early. I went into labor at 34 weeks pregnant on November 27th. I didn't freaking know I was in labor. So I figured today I would share my birth story, my labor story, and our NICU experience, because my baby did end up in the NICU for 9 days, mainly because she was so early and she was just small. And we had some issues that, you know, we needed to monitor before we could bring her home. Let's get into it. Let's get into my early labor and how I didn't even know what was happening. So like I said, on November 27th was the day I went into labor, but 3 days before that, so November 27th was a Saturday. On Wednesday before that, I actually had my regular 34-week OB appointment and everything looked great. We didn't do a cervical check at that point because we were going to wait to start doing those at 36 weeks, which would have been my next appointment, because that's when we were going to do the strep test and all of that. You know, did the normal stuff, you know, the pee, your heart, your blood pressure, and your weight, and then just an ultrasound to check. And at that point, my fluid looked good, my cervix was closed from what they could see on the ultrasound, and baby girl was head down. So everything looked normal. I wasn't having any pain, I wasn't experiencing anything. That evening when I got home, I noticed I had a little dampness in my underwear, which I had had a few times, and I had mentioned it with my OB before, and discharge is really normal at that point in pregnancy, and it wasn't much, it was like a small amount. And I smelled it and I was like, you know, it just smells like discharge, like vaginal discharge. So I didn't think anything of it on Wednesday. On Thursday, which was Thanksgiving, I was talking to my mom on the phone, and I was experiencing some back pain, which was normal for me at that point, and I was on my yoga ball, and I was just bouncing on my yoga ball, doing my thing, talking to my mom. When me and my mom got off the phone, I got up off the yoga ball and had walked into the kitchen, and I'm standing there, and I felt just like I had peed myself. Like a little bit of fluid came out. It didn't feel like it was coming out of my vagina at any point. It felt like it was coming out of my bladder, and it just felt like I had a little bladder leak. I didn't really think much of it. It didn't feel like a gush of any kind or anything like that. I was alarmed by it because I was like, how did I just pee myself and not know? But it was so like normal for me. I was in, you know, Reddit subgroups, and so many first-time moms were talking about how they thought they were in labor, they'd go to the hospital, and then the nurses would be like, are you sure you didn't pee yourself? So I was like, you know, it's only 34 weeks. Apparently that's normal to like pee yourself a little bit. So I, again, didn't think anything of it because it didn't feel like a gush. It didn't feel like what I thought your water breaking should be. But I think what had happened was I was having a slow amniotic leak, and I didn't know. Like, I had no idea. And again, there was no warning signs. I didn't have any health concerns. A lot of people have asked if I knew or if they know why I went into early labor, and no, I didn't have any health concerns at all. My blood pressure has always been good in my appointments. My weight hasn't like skyrocketed. I've passed my gestational diabetes test. There was nothing, literally nothing that would have indicated that this was going to happen. And again, I had just gone to the OB, so I was like, everything looked good. Like, there's nothing, you know? And again, it wasn't like a big gush. It was just, it just felt kind of like I just peed a little bit. It was like a small amount, not enough to like soak through and go down my legs or anything like that. Just, you know, enough to make my underwear wet, which again, discharge is totally normal. And, you know, it's a pee coming out, totally normal. I mean, everyone talks about how when you're pregnant, you laugh and you pee a little. But apparently that was not the case. So that was Thanksgiving Day. My sister and brother-in-law and my niece showed up that evening, and I felt fine. There was no other like fluid. So again, with your water breaking, you're told that it's typically like a steady stream. It will continue to come out. I didn't have anything else. So I just had that one instant, and then it was nothing for the rest of the day. So I was like, oh, okay, totally fine, you know? Yeah, I just peed. We go throughout Thanksgiving. We're playing games that night. We're chilling. No big deal. We wake up the next day on Black Friday, and the whole family, we all go out to a mall, and we're walking around. Over the course of the day, we walked probably like 4 miles. I took breaks. I took mini breaks. I sat down a lot. So I didn't think I was totally overdoing it until we left. I checked my step counter on my phone, and we had walked like 4 miles, and I was like, oh, that's kind of a lot. But again, Nothing else was really alarming. I felt fine. That evening we started playing some board games, and as we're playing a board game, I look at my sister and I go, sis, what do contractions feel like? Because at this point I had felt tightness in my abdomen in a different location. At this point I had already been having Braxton Hicks for a while, and I had actually talked to my OB about it at my last appointment, asking what they felt like, and I knew what those felt like, and I was feeling something slightly different, and I was like, oh, this just feels a little bit more intense, but it still wasn't painful. My OB said, you'll know real contractions because they'll be painful. These weren't painful to me, they just felt different than what I had already experienced. So I was like, oh, these must be Braxton Hicks still. But my sister described contractions, like, oh, that's kind of what this feels like. She was like, yeah, it will be on like both sides of your pelvis, like where your ovaries are, kind of below, but on the surface level of your skin almost, like right in your hip bones, you'll feel like tightening. And I was like, oh, that's what this feels like. But she was like, but it will feel painful. And I was like, doesn't feel painful to me. It just feels like tightening, kind of like Braxton Hicks did, where Braxton Hicks is like your whole abdomen. This was more targeted. So my sister was like, that sounds questionable. So my sister was the one that was like, start tracking your contraction. So I didn't even have a contraction tracking app at that point. So I downloaded it, started tracking my contractions, and they were kind of all over the place. I was like, okay, 10 minutes here, 12 minutes here, long periods of nothing. When I would walk around, it would feel better. Like I wouldn't really notice. I could sleep through some of them. But they weren't consistent. They weren't getting closer together. They were lasting about a minute, but they were really inconsistent and all over the place. So again, I was like, these are Braxton Hicks. These are just really intense. I was like, I just over-exercised. I overexerted myself. So the next morning I wake up, I'd been tracking them basically whenever I woke up that night, and again, they were really inconsistent, weren't that painful, honestly, just kind of annoying. They made me feel like I had to use the bathroom a lot, because it just felt like tightening, which obviously now I know is because they were contractions. But that morning I woke up, still was having them, was getting a little concerned at this point, because I was like, I basically was on and off all night, and I was like, that's a little concerning. And then I went to the bathroom, and when I wiped, I didn't see anything, but when I stood up and I looked down, there was some blood in the toilet. And of course, I freaking panicked. I panicked and I was like, that's not right. That is not right. And I ran out of the bathroom, looked at my husband. I was like, we need to go to the ER like right now. I was like, something's not right. I don't know what it is. I've been having these Braxton Hicks. I was like, I think I overexerted myself. We need to go and just make sure everything's okay. So we go, and I'm like crying at this point because I think I've done something. Like I think there's something wrong with the baby because I saw blood in the toilet, and I was like, oh no, I've like overdone it. And I've been having these Braxton Hicks, which are probably like a warning sign that something bad is happening. That's basically where my head was at. I was not thinking I'm in labor at all because I wasn't in pain really. You know, like I was just slightly uncomfortable. I was more anxious than anything. So we get to the ER, we get to triage, and they check me in, and we're waiting, and they're doing my blood pressure, they're, you know, strapping all the things on me. They're not really saying much. They're like, we're just gonna check you, we're gonna check your cervix and see what's going on, we're gonna see if your water's broken, just general checks. So the OB comes in, that works for the ER, and she gets the speculum, and she goes in to check, and she like doesn't even have to put the speculum in. She was like, oh no honey, your water's broken. And she was like, let me check your cervix real quick. So she's checking my cervix, which honestly, everyone talks about how painful those are. It's not that bad. But she checks my cervix, and she was like, so your water is broken, you're 4 centimeters dilated, and this baby's coming today. And I literally said to her, excuse me, what? Excuse me? What did you say? And I think all of the blood probably rushed out of my face, and I looked like a deer in headlights. And then it took me like 2 hours to process what was happening. I was not ready. We didn't have our hospital bag. We didn't even have our car seat in the car. I was not expecting it at all. I was thinking that they were going to tell me that I had like over-exercised the day before, and they were just going to put me on bed rest. And they were going to be like, hey, take it easy for the rest of your pregnancy. Chill out. That's what I was expecting. I was not expecting, hey, you're having a baby now. So we stay in triage for a little bit longer. I'm still processing what's happening. I'm having full meltdowns. I'm crying, I'm panicking, I'm crying, I'm panicking. I come to terms with it a little bit, and then I cry, and then I panic. That's kind of the range of emotion I was feeling. We called the entire family, let them know what was happening. Luckily, it was like a silver lining on all of this was my sister was in town for Thanksgiving, which I haven't seen my family in almost a year at this point, so it was just really nice having her. We got lucky as well. The hospital had just changed COVID regulations to where 2 people, I can't count, 2 people were allowed into the labor and delivery room. So once they checked me into my room, my sister was allowed to be there, which was really nice just to have that extra support. My sister and my husband got our hospital bags together, and you know, they did the thing because I was stuck in the hospital. They weren't gonna let me leave at that point, obviously, and they checked me into my room. And that's basically it. But yeah, a lot of people are asking if there was any warning signs. No, it just didn't feel the way I thought it would. Contractions did not hurt for me, like, at all until I got to like 8 centimeters dilated. Then those hurt. Those didn't feel good. Those I could feel through my epidural, which I'll get into. But yeah, contractions weren't as painful as I thought they would be. Like, not even close. I just breathed through them and it was fine. I did 4 breaths in, 8 breaths out, like through all of my contractions. That's what I did, and it really helped. And that was that. They just didn't feel the way I thought. Nothing was the way I thought it was. Like, my water breaking didn't feel the way I thought it was. Contractions didn't feel the way I thought they would. Nothing felt right. I mean, I don't think I had a full water break. I think I had a slow leak, but we'll never know. We'll never know. And I guess there's no point in beating myself up about it anymore. I feel pretty guilty already because I didn't know, but it is what it is. So now to get into the actual birth part, or like laboring part, it wasn't that bad. I ended up getting an epidural. I was about 6 centimeters when I requested for my epidural, and I only requested for it then not because I was in pain, honestly, but because they said it would take a while. So I requested mine at 6 centimeters so I could have it, and I'm so glad I had it because I was progressing insanely fast. Like, I was dilating so fast. Like, I got checked into triage at like noon or 11 or noon, and then I got into my room about an hour or so after that, and I had my baby at 8 p.m., like around 8 p.m. So I progressed way faster again. I thought I was gonna have a long labor, thought I was gonna be at least easy 12 hours, but I guess I did labor at home and just not know it. But I thought I'd be in pain for like 12, 16 hours because everyone tells you your first baby takes a while. No, I was progressing so fast. I was in triage at 4 centimeters. I was literally at 6 centimeters like an hour and a half, 2 hours later. And I requested the epidural because I was like, oh, it's going to take a while. And I'm so glad I did because, again, by the time I got to 8 centimeters, I was already hooked up to the epidural and I could feel those, and those didn't feel good. Those were painful. Like, my epidural was just kicking in when those came in, and I was pressing that button. I was like, give it to me. Give me more juice, please. Because I could feel them, and they were close together. Like, super close together. But the epidural wasn't as bad as I was expecting either. It just wasn't as painful. The only part that like scared me was when she was like cleaning my back. It was cold and I jumped, and then you can feel the epidural and then you feel like pressure and coldness, but it wasn't painful either. And it did so much good work. Like, I could feel everything still. I could feel like people were touching my legs, and I could feel it. I could still move my feet and my legs. I definitely probably wouldn't have been able to stand at that point, and I was needing help because my legs felt so heavy. I was needing help moving into different positions. Other than that, I could feel everything. It just took away all pain, which was amazing. And I haven't had any issues with recovery. I'm 2 weeks postpartum now and I feel fine. Like, I don't have any back pain or anything like that, so that's good. I did notice though I stalled a little bit. Once I got my epidural, I wasn't progressing as fast, so from 8 centimeters to 10 was probably the longest, and I got stuck at I think 9 centimeters for like 2 hours. It was a really long time of me stuck there. And then once I got to 10 centimeters, the nurses were checking me and they're like, okay, I have something, I can't remember what she called it, but like my pelvic bone or pelvis bone protrudes down a lot. I can't remember what they called it, but because of that, we had to move me into all sorts of positions because basically we needed baby's head to come out from under that, and then after that, she would be able to like get into a good position for me to push. If I hadn't done that, she would have gotten stuck probably on my bone, and we it wouldn't have been good. But yeah, again, all of that happened. I hit 10 centimeters about an hour before I started pushing because they wanted to try and help her. So we were moving me in different positions at that point, and they really helped kind of move her around. And eventually she got past that bone, and then it was go time. So I started pushing at 8 o'clock p.m. and I only pushed for 40 minutes, 40-ish minutes. And she was here. And again, I was 34 weeks and 5 days, so about 35 weeks, really close to 35 weeks. But she was very small, and she was early, she was small, and of course she had to go to the NICU, which for me, that was the hardest part. Labor, fine. All of that, fine. Honestly, the worst part about labor, besides not knowing that I was in labor, the worst part was definitely getting the IV on my hand, which you guys can see is still bruised, and I'm pretty sure hit a nerve because my hand these two fingers don't feel right anymore. But the hand IV sucked, and getting the catheter sucked because my epidural had not kicked in when they gave me the catheter. Those were the worst parts for me as far as like labor. Beyond that, having a baby that has to go immediately to the NICU, no, thank you. Don't want to ever do that again. I hope that never happens again. And she was born at 8:41. They checked her. Her lungs seemed fine. That's the biggest concern with a baby born at like 34, 35 weeks, is that their lungs aren't fully developed. She cried. She was breathing on her own. She was breathing like room air, which is really good for a baby born at that time. She was just really small. She didn't have any like fat on her body. She was just really like, she was only 4 pounds, 5 ounces. So just tiny. So that was one of our bigger concerns, but of course they had to monitor her breathing as well because she was so early. So they checked her, they did all the measurements, all the normal stuff, and then they let me hold her for I think just like a couple minutes, and that's it. I got to hold her, they took some pictures for us, and then they literally took her out of the room, and I didn't get to see her for hours. Luckily they let my husband go to the NICU with her, but like I was stuck in the room by myself. At that point, the labor and delivery room, all of the nurses whisked the baby away. My husband went with them, which again, I'm grateful for. My sister was only allowed to stay until visiting hours were over, which technically they were over at 8 o'clock. So they let her stay up until the baby was born, and then she had to leave. And once my sister was gone, all the other nurses left, and I was just sitting alone in my labor and delivery room, just sitting there being like, okay, well that happened. Like, what a day. Like, it was a whirlwind for me. I didn't have time to process any of my emotions because all of it happened within like 10 hours. Like, all of that happened. And then at the end of it, I'm just sitting there and you don't even get to hold your baby, and it's super hard. A little bit later, they brought me food. I was eating, and as I'm eating, my husband comes back from the NICU and they're preparing me to move into our recovery room, which, let me tell you, what recovery, what recovery. They check us into our room and I was like, how soon can I go to the NICU? How soon can I go? Can I go? Can I go? So we get into our recovery room. We kind of go through, the nurses check me, kind of settle, not really at all. And then I immediately go to the NICU. We're off. We're going. We're doing skin to skin. We're getting the rundown on what they're doing, what's going to be happening. She was in a small NICU room at this point under a warmer. At that point too, she was only like in her diaper and just being warmed. We started trying to latch, like as far as breastfeeding, and obviously my milk hadn't come in at that point, and she was just freshly born, tiny little thing. But we did get to do skin to skin. I think we stayed in the NICU that first night for hours, and I was exhausted, and I had to end up going back because obviously after you have a baby, they have to check you, make sure your uterus is shrinking correctly, make sure your bleeding is normal, and like all of that postpartum stuff that no one really warns you about. I did not know you were getting a freaking painful massage to make sure your uterus was going. It wasn't that painful, but like it's very uncomfortable. It's like I just pushed out a baby and now you're in here pushing on my abdomen. But like your nurses have to check you. They have to check your vitals. I think every 4 hours is what our hospital is doing. They're having to make sure you're going to the bathroom. So like your first bathroom, like your first pee, like they watch you. And like my nurse like cleaned me up for me. She like cleaned everything for me. So like that had to happen. I had to get my, uterus massages, have your whole situation checked constantly, and all I could think about was going back to the NICU constantly. And I'm not gonna lie, I was a disgusting garbage person the entire hospital stay. I stayed in my hospital gown. The one I labored in, stayed in it the whole time. Clothes, I didn't care. I was going back and forth. I wasn't putting on clothes. I was like, I don't have time. I didn't even shower until the day before the night before we left. I was like, I should probably shower. I was a disgusting garbage person. The clothes my husband packed, he packed me like a going home outfit, and I was like, that's all I need. I'll just stay in this hospital gown. I do not care. And we spent a lot of time in the NICU I think we were only in the hospital for 2 days, and then I got discharged, and then that was a whole situation of leaving the hospital without your baby. Like, it's hard enough when they whisk the baby away after you have had the baby, then leaving the hospital and going home and being like, well, now, like, what do I do? Because you have all these emotions. One, your hormones are all over the place. Two, you feel guilty because you're like, well, that's my baby. I should be taking care of them. Again, your hormones are all over the place, and it just didn't feel right. It felt really uncomfortable, just wrong. Everything felt wrong about it, and I cried basically every time we had to leave. But luckily we went home. I think that first night home, we showered, put on fresh clothes, ate a good meal, and then went back to the NICU. I'm pretty positive it was so many days, it's hard for me to remember that first night. They all blurred together after a while, but we went back and forth multiple times over the 9 days. At first it seemed like she was progressing really, really well. That the first night in the NICU, I forgot to mention this, the first night in the NICU, right after she was born, she had one scare where she stopped breathing for like, it wasn't long, it was like 30 seconds, but like she just stopped breathing. But luckily she started again, so they weren't concerned about it. They said it's pretty normal for preemie babies. And then after that she didn't have anything else really. But the longer we were there, the more they realized that she wasn't regulating her body temperature. So that's what was keeping us in the NICU. Otherwise, they said we probably would have went home way earlier. Around day 3, my milk still hadn't come in, and I was wanting to breastfeed and feed her like breast milk. And I think being separated too has really hurt my milk supply and has hurt the breastfeeding journey, because like I couldn't be there all the time. They had to feed her formula at one point because originally when they go into the NICU, they get a sucrose drip, and she wasn't gaining weight. And with how small she was and she had no body fat really, they needed to put weight on her. So after like day 3 or 4, they suggested doing formula because my milk hadn't really come in. The colostrum I was actually getting was obviously not enough to really feed her and put weight on her. So then we started doing that. I started pumping on like day 4 after, because I finally was getting milk. We were trying breastfeeding. Trying breastfeeding in the hospital was the most stressful thing I think I've ever done. And not because like at that point, you know, all modesty is out the window anyway. So it wasn't like because, you know, people are out and like grabbing my boobs and like forcing them. She was just so small. And again, she was in the NICU. So like we weren't like quite there on like every feeding. I was the one doing it. Like we weren't there for every feeding. And it was so stressful because she would scream and cry because she couldn't get the latch. Like she didn't have the energy either. She was sleeping all the time because she was cold, and she was using all of her energy to stay warm. So then trying to breastfeed on top of that was so stressful for me, to the point where like the last few days in the NICU, I didn't want them to mention breastfeeding to me because I was like, y'all are all stressing me out. Every time they would try to do it when we were there, I would sweat like profusely because I would start getting so anxious, and she would start screaming. And for the most part, she's really mild. She doesn't really cry too much at all. And to hear her like scream cry every time was not doing us any favors. It was stressing me out. It was stressing her out. And so I started exclusively pumping too, because again, it was just easier with her being in the NICU. It wasn't quite what we wanted. We're trying, now that we're home, I try to put her like for breastfeeding multiple times a day to try, and we're kind of getting there. It's getting a little bit better, but wasn't the journey that I wanted. It's just, yeah, it's just how it went, and it's a little upsetting, but you know, we're gonna keep trying. But again, that was at day 3. They started feeding her formula to put on weight. She kind of put on weight. And then towards the end, they were like, oh, you're on day like 5, I think, when we were in the NICU, or day 4. They were like, oh, you should be going home soon. Like, we could even get you discharged maybe tomorrow. So we were really excited. We were thinking, oh, she gets to come home already. And then the next day we go in and they tell us her body temperature is not regulating. It's really low. She's really cold all the time. We need to figure out how to get her regulated. At that point, she had been sleeping in like a normal bassinet. And they were like, we need to like double swaddle her, put her hat on and all of this to see if she can maintain heat. And they did that for 24 hours and it didn't work. And like she was wearing like 2 outfits, double swaddled and a hat, and her temperature was still really low. So obviously we couldn't take her home because that's really risky. So that was like a huge disappointment of like spending the whole night thinking that the next day you get to take your baby home finally, and then being told that you can't. And obviously we want her to stay at that point because you don't want anything to happen to her, but it's just really hard to get your hopes up after being told something, you know? So that day was really, really hard. And they also had to move her back into a warmer. So they ended up putting her in an isolette, I think is what they're called. It's basically the box that warms them. And seeing them move her into that was just really difficult to like deal with because it felt like we were moving backwards. And again, it just stressed me out so much and it just felt really discouraging. And it was already tough being there because we were going back and forth. We were spending all kinds of hours there. I never wanted to leave, but I was also super uncomfortable because like obviously I'm still trying to recover from giving birth. I'm having I had pregnancy edema where I had a bunch of swelling in my legs and feet, like to the point where my Crocs didn't fit. I didn't even know that was a thing. My Crocs usually fall off my feet, but like my feet were so swollen. And obviously being in the hospital is not the most comfortable. They had like a pull-out bed for us and stuff, but like it wasn't comfortable. So I often had to go home and just like rest and like prop my feet up, which I hated, you know. She spent 48 hours in the isolette and it seemed like her body temperature was starting to go up. She was putting on a little bit of weight because we were doing formula and breast milk to try and help with that. And then finally on day 8, they were like, okay, she's been good body temperature wise, you can take her home. So we finally got to take her home on day 9, which was last Monday. So a week ago, the day this video goes up, we finally got to take her home. Again, she's 2 weeks now and everything's been good in our first week. Very stressful as far as like me being overly concerned, and I still hear the freaking NICU alarms that she was hooked up to for over a week in my sleep sometimes, and I'm a little panicky about like her body temperature. She, up until her actual due date, which her actual due date was supposed to be January 3rd, she has to be like double clothed and in a swaddle at all times, like all times, until we get her there, because we still have to get her weight up because her body temperature is still, it's fine now, but it's still a concern until she puts more fat on and puts on weight. Up until January 3rd, we're being very cautious at this point and trying to take it easy, adjusting. Something about the NICU that was kind of nice, kind of like a blessing in disguise. Not that I would ever want to go through this, like that experience ever again. And not that the NICU was bad at all. The NICU nurses were amazing. The doctors were amazing. Everyone was so like accommodating and sweet to us. So it wasn't that was an issue. It was just, it was hard, you know. It was hard having to leave constantly, and now we're still concerned. I'm just freaking paranoid anyways, which is probably partly hormones, partly, you know, experiencing that and seeing her in a hospital with things strapped to her for days, all of these alarms and things going off all the time, and nurses coming in and out, and it was a lot. It was a lot to process, especially right after giving birth. But otherwise, very happy to be home. Very grateful that that whole experience is behind us for the most part. And I definitely feel like I'm forgetting something. I wrote like a bunch of notes and I feel like I didn't even look at them. Did I even look at these? I don't think I did. I didn't. And I'm sure I'm forgetting some stuff for the most part, but I just kind of wanted to talk about, you know, labor, delivery, my experience with going into preterm labor. That was completely spontaneous. It was an experience. That's what I keep saying. It was an experience, and it definitely wasn't the way we ever planned on this happening. I never thought this would happen to me or to us, and it is what it is. I'm glad she's here. I'm glad she's okay now, and that's that. I'm not pregnant anymore, which is also the weirdest thing. Right after giving birth, they gave me juice, like to drink, and I was sitting there drinking my juice waiting for her to kick, and then I realized she just got evicted. She evicted herself from the womb. Yeah, that's been a strange adjustment, but otherwise the adjusting to being at home has been pretty smooth. We do have the NICU schedule, which I think I started mentioning earlier and then completely got sidetracked. The NICU schedule, they do like touch times, and they have like a very rigorous schedule that they do, because obviously they're taking care of multiple babies, and we've kind of stuck to that, and that's really, really helped. Again, because I'm pumping, Michael can help me with feedings like 100%. So I do like the first 2 night shifts. He does the early morning shifts, and that really helps us with sleep. We're both getting probably about 5-6 hours of sleep right now, which isn't ideal for me. I'm an 8-hour kind of girl, but it's better than none, and it's better than having to wake up all hours of the night. So far we are adjusting pretty well. I don't know how much, I don't know if I'll ever do another like dedicated video like this, but definitely if you guys have any questions, I'm sure again I missed something. If you guys have any questions, leave them down in the comments and I will answer them, or we'll do another dedicated Q&A, get ready with me maybe at some point, where I'll go over some stuff, because I know I forgot some stuff. I was a little all over the place. And I think still I'm processing some of it and all of that. But yeah, baby girl's here. She's now officially 2 weeks old, which is very exciting. And I introduced her on my Instagram. So if you guys want to see name reveal, I'm not going to do a big video on her name reveal. I'm not going to bring her in here right now either, because she's sleeping, and I'll let her get her sleep. My Instagram is always down in the description, so definitely go check that out if you are interested. Thank you all so much for watching, and thank you to everyone who has sent me kind messages, who have left such sweet comments on things, who have checked in with me, checked in with baby, checked in and seen how the whole family unit's doing. Thank you guys so much. It really does mean a lot to us, especially because it was such a scary, tumultuous time for us. So we appreciate all of you. I don't know what my schedule will be like. I'm trying really hard to like kind of keep things kind of going smoothly. Luckily I had some pre-filmed videos for December, but I don't know if I'll stick to 3. If I can stick to 3 videos a week, I'm gonna officially think I'm a witch. But bear with me. I will keep you guys updated on Instagram mainly, and the community posts, so definitely keep an eye out on that. But again, I appreciate you guys so much. Hope you all are having an amazing day. Remember, there is always magic to be found, even in all of these tough situations. And I hope that means I see all of you in my next video. Bye!
Alright, ooh baby, just hold tight. We're up at the moonlight, believe in the magic. On side, we'll make it feel just right. Just look at that bright light, believe in the magic. And we can save you from